on the year abroad in transition and transition to the year abroad. And I thought it was a very rich paper, and I thought there was a lot to unpack from there. So we organized this session, this discussion, with our four respective year abroad coordinators. Well, I'll let them introduce themselves. Do we have a second mic for? Yeah, it's okay. Well, do you want to start, Alice?
Yeah. My name is Alice Farris, and I'm the Study Abroad Coordinator for Languages and Cultures and Visual Studies at Exeter University. I used to be coordinator for the whole College of Humanities, and now there's been restructuring. I am for MLC. And I've done it for 12 years, so I've got quite a bit of experience in that.
I can't claim to have 12 years experience in this. My name is Conny Opitz. I'm in Cardiff University. I was have been the German year abroad coordinator, and I'm now the school year abroad coordinator. So overseeing all the 7 languages that we have where we send people abroad.
Hi everyone, I'm Steve Wharton. I'm the dead man. That's the Departmental Exchanges and Assistantships Director for the Department of Politics, Languages and International Studies here at Bath. I'm actually in French. I chair our Year Abroad Committee, and I work with our team of individual Year Abroad officers who work across each language.
Hi, Ian Foster, University of Bristol. Like Alice, I've been doing this for a dozen years now. I basically organize other people to do the work. But when I started the job, my colleague who had been the year abroad officer previous to me, which had been a rotating position, handed me a very highly decorated trowel. And he told me I was going to have to shovel something unpleasant with it. I kind of disagreed with him, and I put the trowel in the drawer, and I haven't looked at it since.
Okay, so we've got about 45 minutes for this session, or just under now. So I thought we would have the first half hour or so just discussing on a few areas that are key, that have emerged from the discussions, and then have 15 minutes from the floor so that you can react as well. So we've been living through very tumultuous years, and I was wondering if you could tell me what we have learned from these recent, say, 5 years, and how this should inform our way forward.
Yeah, we thought we'd start with this topic to celebrate and reflect on what we've been through. COVID, Brexit, all of these really challenging events that we had no control whatsoever, but had a huge impact on the provision. And we have done a lot to adapt and move forward. So when we met to think about what we would like to talk about, we were talking about things we did during lockdown, the no travel period, and link them to also how students are now, how resilient these students are after all of these events, and what we have put in place to face them. We brainstormed a couple of big things that we did during this period. The UCFL Special Interest Group on the Year Abroad held numerous online meetings. They set up resources for students who couldn't travel due to COVID restrictions. There were 3 MOOCs that we used in our institutions, in different institutions locally. For example, at Exeter, we had an intensive language course that we organized that many colleagues were involved in to boost the confidence of the students. We made changes to the final year curriculum, the provision, to take into account the challenges the students had faced. And we try to adapt it to the consequences of, I have to name it, Brexit and the travel restrictions that it imposed. So making an adjustment to the length and having positive discussions on what is, should we talk about a year abroad, the length of period that students stay abroad in the face of mainly visa restrictions. All of these events and adjustments that we made had no doubt an impact on the students' welfare and ultimately on their resilience now during the year abroad. And our experience has been we've shared the common experience of lack of engagement with the provision, the feeling that they're not getting the support that they need, they're not getting the support that they deserve, and you think, okay, there's a lot of stuff that we are doing. How can we make you understand that there is a lot of support, but at the same time, what can we do to put together more things that we can do? For example, this year at Exeter, I was lucky enough to receive funding to employ a final year student specifically dedicated to support me in the provision of the year abroad. And her role was to organize networking events between second and final year abroad, but also welcome back events and other type of events just with finalists, reorganize the resources that we have, and provide one-to-one drop-in sessions with her, without me, to say, what is the problem? What are you finding difficult? Not mentally, I'm not talking about offering any kind of support like that, but I still don't know what to do. It's okay, let's talk about it. And doing it with a student can be maybe easier. We're talking about also a similar thing that is in place at Bath. Stevie, we're talking about these,
we've now incorporated,
podcasts.
yes, we've incorporated a session on resilience in our weekly semester 2 workshops for the students. Small sidebar, I think one of the biggest issues that we face as a sector is the over-medicalisation of young people. I think there are clear issues of mental health, which are serious issues of mental health for students, but they are being medicalized, they're being given a medicalization vocabulary in schools, which they then import into the university sector. And that affects their ability, I think, to deal with things which would have been commonplace in the past, that immediately it has a label attached to it, which makes difficulties. We don't tell them that during the resilience session, but we try and emphasize the need to step back. I usually say to mine, this is great. You can see drunken film stars falling out of taxis at 3 o'clock in the morning live in your feed. But one of the biggest problems is you use it straight away. And if you're not in personal danger with the situation, try and step back, think what you can do. But in addition to the resilience and the resilience workshop, and there's more of that in the briefing we gave them for the Year Abroad Open Day, we've been using final year students and getting them to make podcasts when they're back about what they were doing. So you get different groups, different languages, different activities, and they then say, this is what it was like. And those are available for all of the students. And then we're looking at this year introducing a session that brings second years and final years together. We always invite them to come to the second year briefing sessions, but having something a bit more kind of social and informative, sort of welcome back event.
Yeah, I'd say I really like what Alice has done with an intern. I think that's fantastic. I'd like to get the money for it.
It wasn't too expensive.
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of things.
Thank you.
These are important things to invest on.
The thing that Steve mentioned about getting students to do podcasts is actually really good. And there's a context here that I think you maybe need to be aware of. We all have international offices as well as the roles that we have. And as colleagues, we work very closely with a permanent team at the center of the university who are not just responsible for modern languages students, they're also responsible for the other hundreds of students who are going abroad. Many of them to Anglophone destinations, let's say, but they're still equally in need of support. One of the things that our team in the centre has done recently echoes exactly what Steve was saying, was putting podcasts on a Padlet about specific universities in Spain. Now, I can't swear to it, but they say to me that that has reduced the number of inquiries they're getting about what do I have to do at university, whichever one it is. It's reduced it massively. So that can be a really good way of getting a student voice in if you can't persuade your fourth years to come along to meetings, which frankly, sometimes you can't.
Yeah, just on that, I think it's a really good idea, because I think we've all been informally trying to get more or less formally for final years and second years together. But with us, it's more the second years that do not take up this. So if you have something more permanent, that's very useful. And particularly, like anytime the final years come in, I wish, you know, I was recording them, because what they say is so true, and it rings truer than if we say it. And particularly the fact that it's not all going to be fantastic and wonderful, but they are going to be challenges, that this is a normal part of the process, which I think is very important for second years to. I think it's all post-secondary.
I mean, it is the dragon that we have to slay, the idea that the year abroad is always wonderful, because unfortunately that idea is still out there, and we've got to keep telling them, look, it may be great, but there's going to be some tough times as well. And that's a complicated message. Unfortunately, when they come to open days, when they think about studying with us, their eyes are on the positives. Understandably, Cardiff's the city I want to go to, you know, being fair here.
You talked about slaying a dragon, so that's
yeah. But the point is that the mentality is they look to the positives. And therefore, when they get to the year abroad, there's this great expectation that builds up and builds up. And we have to work really hard to get them back down to reality on that. And I think that's where the fourth years really come in, I think.
I wanted to have your views on the impact of these structural changes and external factors in our universities on our students, and how we assess them on their year abroad.
Okay, shall I kick off? Yeah, and then I have a handy visual aid behind me, as you will have seen. Cardiff, it's actually 10% of the year abroad. My apologies for that missing. You can see it's a mixed economy, because in line with the fact that all institutions have their individuality and their rights by charter to determine how they teach, it's assessed in different ways. It can depend whether you're spending your time abroad. It can depend how you're spending your time abroad. Are you assessed when you come back? How are you assessed? But of course, Brexit has made things more difficult. For example, where students split a year, used to be very easy. Nowadays, of course, they have to come back to the UK in order to apply for the visa for the second country they're going to, which means, therefore, that they may have to skip the assessments they would normally do, which would be in the beginning of the calendar year following their studies. And how do we accommodate that? Universities are great at using that word normally in all of their regulations and finding workarounds. And the general rule of thumb is, if in doubt, don't immediately ask registry, but think of how you can accommodate the situation. Try and look at some general ground rules, but also think about how you can deal with those individual situations. The other issue is that sometimes there's a tension, again, between central administration and the institutional department on how those marks are converted. We believe it's our sovereign right as departments to make the judgment call on what is a mark and what is a pass mark. Sometimes our professional services colleagues in the centre have hard and fast rules they wish to impose, and that's something we also need to be aware of. But as you can see, the commonality is that there is an element of the foreign language, because after all, that's one of the things they're there for. There is another commonality, which is about engaging with the cultures and the societies. But the issue particularly is, how do we find that way of balancing the need to assess fairly alongside institutional pressures to simplify and contain rising workload? because all of these things that come in, everybody is working harder. I won't talk about visas, and although I've hinted at them. So I think that's essentially all I wanted to say. You can see that there's an additional pressure as well, partly financial because of students, but partly also institutional. Do we need to assess the year abroad at all? Because we can see up there we've got pass, fail, or different percentages. And do we really need a year abroad? I mean, you know, it's not, it puts more financial burden on the students, adds to their pressure, stresses them in terms of preparation, etc., etc. That way madness lies. In my view, a year abroad is an integral part of an undergraduate program, and we should do our damnedest to ensure it remains so. And on that trenchant note, I shall hand over to Conny.
Right, very hard place to follow on to. Yeah, and I mean, we of course we kept the most serious side, for want of a better word, to the last, which is the difficulties that arise from Brexit for particular sets of students, and the impact it's having on the overall experience, and therefore creating this whole discourse of whether we actually need the year abroad. And I would be with Steve on saying that it is not just because it kind of means that we're here to stay, but I can't envisage a a college experience, sorry, college in the Irish sense of the word, so a university experience of studying a modern language, or, you know, without actually having an opportunity to develop the culture and whatever skills. Although, of course, you know, students come from all sorts of different backgrounds now, and there's other ways to diversify, you know, to get these, you know, there's an emphasis on diversification, and, you know, there may be other ways of getting those skills. But I come back to that, what we should be doing with this. But maybe just on the assessment still. I find that there's a lot of tensions in terms of how you configure the assessment, and I don't think it's the first thing we should think about when we plan out the abroad and think about the provision and you know, where we send students and so on. However, of course, it is ultimately very important. That's what the students probably think about first. I don't know. And you know, we find that, and there's a tension with that also on the part of the finances, etc., that we'll get to in a moment. You know, with higher emphases these days on, you know, the development of life skills, of employability skills. You know, if you compare assessments that we used to do in the past, where, you know, people would have typically have written a cultural essay on some aspect that they would have researched or something like that, yeah. This has gone out of the window for us, and we've moved whole scale to reflection. I think this is probably not a bad thing, ties in with, you know, building resilience very much. If people realize that they've actually, you know, come a long way in terms of semester, but students generally hate it, which is fair to say. There's also, of course, and we'll hear this afternoon about AI, you know, the whole question of the validity of particular types of assessment and so on. And in Cardiff, we're thinking about adding in a live oral, well, I think it's been decided, live oral element to the reflective piece that students are submitting next year, in order to actually, for them to show their oral skills that we would expect to develop best abroad, and also to kind of see whether what they've written is actually them, I suppose. Yeah, so lots and lots of things to think about in terms of whether, you know, what you, yeah.
Yeah, I'll just add a comment that in Bristol, actually, we're moving closer to what Connie's describing as well. But I have another reason for doing it, which is not just about the validity and the AI question, is very important, and the move to skills. It's also the question of resource, and we'll come to that in a moment. I have a conviction from the years that I've been doing this that we probably overly commit resource to supporting the year abroad. It costs us a lot of time and effort, and now is the time when those things are coming into focus by university managements which are keen on structural change as a way of gaining efficiency. I don't know whether they're right, but that's what they want to do. If that's what we're facing, then we need to be more efficient in terms of the way we assess, which means trying to lighten colleagues' workload if possible, but also come up with something that's convincing, and that's quite a challenge.
Okay, so that's the perfect transition, because I was going to ask you about the funding model, my next area of inquiry. The issues in the current, what are the issues in the current funding model for the year abroad, and what are the real financial costs? Conny, do you want to?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so we'd already hinted at Brexit. Now, Brexit has changed the reality for students who go to Europe. It's basically brought Europe in line with the rest of the world, which a lot of students, with the issues that a lot of students had been facing who were going to China and Japan and elsewhere. And of course funding and the bureaucratic difficulties that it's brought into focus the funding and bureaucratic difficulties that many students had been facing beforehand in other contexts. So the question in terms of funding, is the year abroad expensive? Well, yes. Probably more so than at home. Is it within Europe? Is it more expensive than it was? Yes, because students have to put up costs that they previously didn't have to pay for. Students without European passport. Okay, so it's not every student, but it's students without European passport. The cost of visas, because of course the travel costs every student has to come up with. They may need additional insurances if what the university provides is not sufficient, or as a result of what the hosts require. So we just spoke with somebody yesterday where they only needed in Germany who only needed so they have the GHIC and they needed affirmation or confirmation from one of the local insurers that this is bona fide, that this is okay, and ended up being a member of the scheme and being asked to pay 150 euros a month. Of course, this was all wrong. It shouldn't have happened, and we're sorting it out, or they are sorting it out. But these are things. When you're moving between two cultures, and then there's the language skills, and bureaucratic language in particular is not the easiest to navigate for anybody at the best of times. So now there is. We do also need to point out to students that they do face lower costs in terms of their tuition fee, because that's capped at 15%. However, in reality, this is not something that actually translates into more money in students' pockets. Yeah, so that is the difficulty. You could argue that in some places the cost of living is lower than it is in the UK, but that is neither here nor there. We do also need to point out that the student finance that students are eligible for actually remains in place. So it's not that if they're going now to Europe without funding, but they're going with the same level of funding they had before. In some small cases of limited groups of students, there could be a slightly higher rate that they get, but that's limited. And the big question is around what Erasmus used to provide, i.e. that stipend that students were getting to make their travel possible and attractive, etc., etc. And that is up in the air. Because as you know, there's now Turing in Wales, there's Tithe in addition, and the funding that has been coming forward from those sources has been reducing. When I initially read, when Turing had been instigated about the numbers of students that they were going to be supporting through that, I thought, that is a joke. That's 3 universities. How is that meant to be covering everybody, at the level that we had seen previously? It has some advantages, it has different, of course, both schemes have different foci, which are also valid, but it is reality that the state funding has been reducing and reducing and reducing, so much so that in Cardiff this year, initially we were saying to students, do not expect to get a stipend at all. And in the end, other students became disenfranchised because they said, okay, for MLang, the year abroad is an integral part of they have to go, they have no choice. So they put all the money they had, basically, pretty much towards our students. But that means that other students are missing out. Yeah, so that is a big problem. There's additional problems with Turing in that the timeline of when we get confirmed that we actually have funding is so short. It's never guaranteed. It's totally unreliable. We cannot make any promises ever. We don't know whether the students going, well, at this point, we know that the students going in September have funding, but
having to apply every year for funding as well is quite, with touring, is not guaranteed that you're getting the money, and you have to make an application every year. And there's a difference of how much money they get depending on what type of placement they choose, whether they work or they study. So there are lots of more variants to the problem.
And on the fee situation, as Conny was saying, you get, it's 15% if you're studying abroad. You pay 15% of the normal fee. But actually, if you're on something that's regarded as a work placement, then it's 20%. So that can be difficult for students as well. And very interestingly, of course, I was on a call before this of the Year Abroad Special Interest Group of UCFL. And one of the things that came up there was one colleague whom I will not name, and so spare the blushes of their institution, who essentially says, well, you're not receiving a salary. So when you fill in your form for the student, you know, you're getting an honorarium or you're getting something, but you're getting a minimum. You're not actually getting a salary. So perhaps don't tell the student loan company that I'm not advocating that. I'm merely reporting it as something that was said for the benefit of the tape. But you know, we need to be imaginative in engaging with the hurdles that are placed upon us. But of course, as we know, Turing was due to finish in 2025. Who knows what will happen next week, tomorrow? Everything is in flux. Spelling optional.
So, in terms of the funding for particular placements, there is the clash I mentioned earlier, in that, you know, we say, yeah, you know, it's a wonderful experience. You know, it will give you invaluable skills in terms of employability. So this all should mean that actually work placement should be, you know, promoted. And in fact, when students cannot rely on funding for, you know, their maintenance, perhaps we would have thought the you know, looking for a work placement should be attractive, but there is, in fact, you know, despite the rhetoric, the actual support for students going on work placements is reduced, and that kind of creates additional difficulties, as well as the fact that it seems to be ever more difficult to find work placements. And I assume it's the same in other institutions. Of course, we share, you know, employers or NGOs that our students have worked for and the conditions, and there's some well-trodden and well-established routes. But you know, the British Council obviously also being one of them, it doesn't suit everybody. I'm wondering, sometimes I'm wondering whether students have become pickier, or whether the pressures on them are higher as well, or whether it's a reflection of a changed student body. But certainly in Cardiff, as soon as the announcement was made that there was now some funding available towards their maintenance when they go abroad, a majority of those who'd said they would do a work placement went back on their study placement. So there's a lot to consider. And that is on the student side. But of course, all of that translates into a high workload on our side. And so yeah, so it seems when you're a year abroad coordinator, it seems like all your free time, every time, you know, every bit of time that you don't spend on teaching and resources and maybe some well, scholarship, not in my case to be we're talking about, all your time is spent on year abroad, and the difficulties that students face. And I haven't been in it for long enough to know whether the types of questions and problems have changed that much, but certainly I've seen somewhere I was like, wow.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I would say not only have the types of problems expanded, but there are more students with problems than we've had before. And that isn't just a product of this situation. I suppose if we're going to wrap this up, I think Marie's looking at me saying you would like to invite questions. Just one concluding thought. You can gather from what we're saying that we don't think the current system is working. We're doing our absolute best to keep it running, but there are so many unfairnesses built into it that it's becoming unworkable, if it's not already unworkable. I'm absolutely convinced that every university that has students going abroad is expending far more resource on supporting them than it is doing for almost any other group. And it certainly is spending more money than it's receiving in fees or income from government at the moment.
Yeah, more money, please. Okay, an ongoing problem then, to be revisited. Shall I take the questions now, and we can give participants a round of applause afterwards? Oh.
Well, first of all, thank you very much to the four of you for such a comprehensive, such a comprehensive vision, you know, of what is going on. Yeah, I got many different questions, but I will start perhaps in your kind of roles. If you could give me a sense of why do you think that these generations have become so risk averse? Because, you know, I've been around, like some of you, for a very long time, and in the field of Hispanic studies, not a lot of people used to go to Latin America, but quite a substantial number of students used to go to Latin America. Now, even before Brexit, people started just to want to go to Spain. And even within Spain, they tried to go to the north of Spain because it's closer to Exeter. Yeah. So, you know, I mean, this is my concern. Yeah. I mean, what is the risk? Why are these people so risk averse?
As the father of a 21-year-old who's the youngest of my children, I would say there is a definite generational shift. I wouldn't characterize it necessarily as being about aversion to risk. I think it's actually something more subtle than that. And it has to do with the experience of coming through the school in the last 5 years or so, where you've got not only COVID, but also in terms of curricular development, a very spoon-feeding approach in a different way from what we saw before. There's been more standardization in terms of curricula. There are all kinds of problems with the modern language curriculum in secondary schools. As you will know, I'm sure many of you contributed to the consultations on that. But I think those have led to changes in behavior as well. If I had to isolate one thing, I would say it's the COVID school experience, because what we've noticed at Bristol is our first year students seem a lot more engaged than the previous generations. And if you, that is to say the last 2 or 3 years, I think you've also got to add the influence of social media, electronic media to that, to see the perception of where they are in the world is very different from maybe the days when I went abroad and I sent my parents a postcard at the end of the first week and that was about it. You know, I would have expected minute by minute Facebook or WhatsApp updates now. And that, I think, gives you a different perspective on yourself, on your own ability to deal with the world as well. So I think there are two things. It's not just about fear of risk, it's about perception of the world itself.
And just to build on that, the rise of the influencer puts an incredibly wonderful, everything sky is blue, hello tree, hello clouds picture. And if a student isn't having that experience and they're getting all of these images, they begin to ask themselves, which is why, you know, we've been very careful in what we've said in the podcasts. You know, we all know that the year abroad is an amazing experience, generally speaking. And there are issues, of course, but then again, that's life. And I think some of the phrasing of it and some of that resilience preparation we do is actually saying, like we do anyway with our students, okay, you're looking for a work placement. It's a real job market. You're not going to walk into something. And it's you know, we have to be a little more direct with them. And it kind of goes back a little bit to what I was saying in my intro about over-medicalization and the infantilization and spoon feeding. And we need to step back from that. Yeah. We need to actually say, you know, there's a wonderful French expression, majeur et vacciné. Now, before COVID, you could say that and you'd have to explain it. Now they know what it means. You know, we do need to remind them that they are adults. And that's, you know, it's one of the things we put across. You know, you know what the leap is like from GCSE to A level. School to university is even bigger. You've been a big fish in a small pond. Now the pond is bigger. There are more fish and even the odd shark. And we're going to help you to deal with it. And that's what we need to do. And we need to get them to realise that they can have much more agency if they seek to.
Yeah. On that, just on that front, to add, I think this is so important, and you know, a great example. I think it really is about the expectations and working with the expectations, and kind of, you know, I mean, we don't have to you know, lose our patience with them. It's just, you know, that's the students are whatever the students are today, but we need to work with that and basically be very honest with them, and you know, and set out the realities as you've been saying. Now the difficulty in that is getting them to talk to you. Yeah, so I think that but there's ways, as you've said, to kind of make sure that the message gets to everybody, or to more people than it has been.
Okay. Any more another question from the floor?
Hi. Yes, thank you, all of you. That's exactly the kind of exchange of information and ideas that we need to have in this forum. And my question is for Conny and Alice, and it's on the assessment, because the two of you don't ask your students to write an essay. And like Ian will say, we're moving away from that. So you have experience of a portfolio, and you have in Exeter, and you have experience of a reflective piece. And I was wondering, in your experience, what the pros and cons are of the two, how students have reacted to these two types of assessment, and what tips you have for us. We're
actually moving away.
All right, okay. Everybody's moving away. Thank you. And if you could say just a few details about what you're actually asking students to do. Thank you.
We asked them to do a portfolio and some reports that they write in the target language. The portfolio is in English and includes CV, reflections, job application, cover letter, and two, or depending on whether they spend the whole year working or not, a number of reports in the target language, reflective as well. And if they study, they bring back the marks from the partner universities. And all of our students do an oral exam in the target language, which was one element of difference between us and the others. And we are going to keep that as a kind of, it can serve as a kind of viva, I suppose, with elements of reflection on employability, interculturality, etc., etc. We are slightly moving away from the reports in the target language because, as you can imagine, AI is killing us, and we're spending time, incredible amount of time, marking stuff that has been AI generated. So we are going to move away. The students are very anxious again about completing all of these tasks, and I don't know what we're going to do in the future, but whatever you ask them to do, there is an incredible amount of, and everything is explained to them in person or in videos, in written form. There's an incredible amount of anxiety about everything. Where do I find this? Have you looked for it? No. Control F. Catherine has shared the beauty of the Control F function with the student this year, and the student thanked her greatly and said, "Thank you so, I didn't know that." Well, now you do. So yeah, I don't know whether this is something in common with others, but
yeah, even though our assessment, for us, the reflection has been the first year, so we've only been elaborating it. And yes, students were very anxious about it. And I would say, whatever you do need to train students. And I expect, or I understand that, you know, when you ask them suddenly to write a reflection, that this is very different from what they would have been doing so far. And, you know, it's only fair. You know, the way we've done it is basically there's two briefs. The first semester brief is slightly more open, and they can focus on either the placement itself or the language development, which I thought was interesting. And you know, they enjoyed having a choice there. There's an excellent resource that the uni has created in terms of frameworks of reflection. Now, in reality, many of them are more suited to an ongoing, everyday type of reflection, whereas what we want is kind of a step back from it for a few days and look at it and say, yeah, that's what I've been through. But rather than sharing all the emotions and all, as if they were in the middle of it, kind of put some reflection on it. I was telling them that this is actually not a million miles away from an academic essay, in the sense that what we want is critical distance, which is what they're finding difficult. So it's kind of a hybrid thing, really, in that sense. And but it does address the criticism that some people have brought, which is, oh, this is an ableist assessment, which I can't actually see how they would ever think that it is. It should be enabling for everybody, particularly since we give them a mode. They can produce it in writing or in speaking. Yeah, so we'll see. The second brief was wider, but in actual fact, because of the timing of the exam boards, we've realized that they're not actually going to have it all completed by the time they're producing this. So it's going to be a little bit earlier. So it's actually going to be more in progress than the first semester, which is going to be interesting. I'm looking at two colleagues who've been grading. So the experience of grading them has also been fun. So we ran a workshop for colleagues to kind of say, well, these are the kinds of things that you would want to look for. We've based assessment criteria on the ones we had, but I was saying to students, because of course the threat of AI, the threat in this case, I would think, doesn't go away. And when we were having our training workshop, a colleague actually put my briefs through ChatGPT, I think it was, which came up with quite a convincing sounding reflection. However, so this is where we need to develop our literacy in terms of finding the telltale signs of what is, plausibly something that's been generated by a student. And what I've been saying to the students in their training is, look, it's got to be authentic, it's got to be, it's got to ring true somehow. It's not anonymous, I do think it's valid. I do think it's important in terms of, I do think it actually will help with the whole resilience problem. But yeah. And there was something else I want to say, but
but it's in the target language. What I wanted to say,
it's in the target language,
compared to Alice, you seem to say it was in English.
English portfolio and reports in the target language. But there, whatever you will decide to do, our move will be avoid AI-generated stuff, so rethink that, and also efficiency, which is a word that Ian used, and it's a nice word to say, let's protect ourselves a bit about over-assessing, over-marking, and spending so much in resources into an aspect that with us is 1/7 of their final mark, which is nothing.
Yes, I'm slightly worried about these Vivas coming our way in Cardiff, but I think it should be one or the other, not both. But the Viva could replace.
The oral component has always worked well.
Yeah, so on the Viva, one second, yeah. So just two things on the reflection, if people have, because I think people are thinking of moving to it. So basically, another criticism is the level of language. So you do need to think about what kind of style it's a new style, but in terms of the Viva, I would be very much against it if we were given two different grades or anything. It's got to be it's part of the same grade, and it just adds extra information to what they have written. We keep it simple. I'm very much for keeping it simple.
Okay, thank you very much to all the four of you.